Hey, what's going on, guys? How is everybody doing? A literal god who has chosen to take the mortal form of a young boy he once knew, Venti is one of the most powerful heroes available currently in Genshin Impact. Don't let his childlike demeanor deceive you though, Venti has wisdom beyond those of mortal men, and will often treat his mortal form and Archon roles as separate beings entirely when needing to be called upon. We'll be talking about the stats you should be prioritizing, how to build your artifact sets, what weapons he'll get the most performance from, and what talents you should focus on. We'll be judging these from a free-to-play level all the way up to an endgame primary hero. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell, that way you never miss a video, and join our Discord. Link will be down in the description below. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump right into the video. Venti is a deceptively strong hero. He doesn't look like much, but this Animo songbird packs a mighty punch and has good reason to be heralded as one of Genshin's strongest heroes. The fact is that Venti does something that no other hero can do, and that is mass crowd control. Many have argued, including myself, that a hero like Sucrose or the Animo MC are decent budget replacements as they do similar things with their bursts. However, Venti is so far above them in terms of effectiveness that they really don't come close. Both in terms of range and damage, Venti's burst just overperforms. Combine that with the fact that he groups enemies into a tight ball, making it easier to combo kill them with skills or bursts from your other heroes, or just straight up kill them with Venti himself. If you're having trouble clearing abyss floors that just might have too many enemies, it's likely that adding a Venti to your team will solve most of your problems. On top of that, Venti is tied for the highest energy generation per minute, the others being Jean and Razor, able to generate 30 animo particles per minute with perfect execution. This leads to Venti being a powerful battery for main DPS heroes like Xiao or Jean, who thrive off building their bursts as fast as possible, but can also just lend a lot of energy recharge on a quick swap team that helps to rotate through heroes quickly to spam as many abilities as possible. Venti is certainly a powerful hero, but not without his downfalls, which is a large reason why he's not as ubiquitous as everything I've talked about so far would make it seem. So let's dive into his kit and see in detail what he's all about. Venti's basic attack, Divine Marksmanship, deals 6 consecutive hits with his bow, and when fully charged will deal animo damage. However, if we're being honest, it's unlikely that you'll really be using either of these attacks all that often. Venti's skill, Skyward Sonnet, summons a burst of wind dealing animo damage and launching all small enemies into the air. If the skill is held, Venti summons an even larger gust of wind with Venti as the epicenter, dealing even more damage and keeping smaller enemies in the air for a longer period of time. With each activation of his skill, Venti is able to generate 3 animo particles with a press every 6 seconds, and 4 every 15 seconds when held. So for strictly energy generation, sticking with the shorter cooldown option makes far more sense, as does for damage. Even though holding his skill does anywhere from an extra 100 to 230% extra damage depending on talent level, the extra 150% extra cooldown time necessary for his skill to recharge on a hold is simply not worth it. Though for exploration, this is very handy as it allows you to reach difficult to traverse areas or just add some extra height when you can't make it to the top of a cliff simply by climbing. And upon unlocking his first ascension passive, will unlock this current's ability to stay active for a full 20 seconds. Venti's burst, Wind's Grand Ode, is without a doubt the most devastating aspect of his kit. Venti fires an arrow infused with coalesced winds and generates a localized storm that sucks in all enemies in a massive radius, dealing damage over time and keeping the enemies immobilized. If the eye of the storm comes into contact with any of the following elements, Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, or Electro, the Vortex will then absorb them through elemental absorption and do additional damage over time of that element, which can be the catalyst for insane combos as this allows for reapplication of your aura element easily on a large group of enemies over the 8-second duration. But there's also extra utility once you unlock Venti's 4th Ascension passive. First, recovering 15 energy for Venti as soon as the burst ends, reducing the energy cost to a mere 45 total after receiving this benefit, allowing you to spam this burst with ease, but also providing 15 energy to any ally heroes who share the element absorbed with his burst, further fueling how quickly your other heroes can build their bursts, lending to the fact that Venti is an energy generation machine. This attack isn't perfect though, there are several limitations. For one, larger enemies such as Minotaurs or Fatui skirmishers will not be lifted off the ground and can break out of this suction with ease, if even affected at all. Second, since this attack lifts enemies off the ground, certain heroes, mainly melee heroes, have trouble combating enemies while being thrown about by the vortex. For this reason, Venti finds more success on ranged elemental-based teams. For a full breakdown of who can and can't attack enemies stuck in Venti's vortex, the Venti Main's Discord server has worked up this chart, which you'll see on screen. While this is the case, that some heroes have trouble reaching the enemies as they float above the ground, there is a workaround, though not entirely ideal. If your Venti is underleveled compared to the enemies you're facing, per my community's testing, the difference needs to be at least a 20 level detriment. Venti won't actually be able to lift enemies off the ground. Of course, not ideal. Having underleveled heroes isn't exactly a recommendation. If you're deciding between two separate heroes to level for the time being though, one being Venti, it could make sense to push him to the end of the line for the time being at least. For talent prioritization, is it even a question at this point? Level up this boy's burst. It's the sole reason for him being as good as he is. That being said though, his skill damage does scale really high and it does get used quite often for that energy generation and of course the damage. So make sure not to leave this behind. As for his auto attack, let's just move on to his constellations. Constellation 1 provides Venti with 2 additional arrows to fire per aimed shot, each dealing a third of the original arrow's damage. Most Venti players, if not all, will tell you that this constellation of his is mostly useless, an expensive stepping stone to further constellations, as the arrows stray at quite a large angle away from the first and are only really effective at close range, assuming that you're actually using your Venti for charge attacks. Constellation 2 is where we start to get excited, his skill now decreasing enemies' ammo and physical resistance by 12% for 10 seconds, and a further 12% while stuck in an airborne state. Constellations 3 and 5 are typical skill and burst promotions, with his burst coming first, which is a big plus. Constellation 4 increases Venti's ammo damage bonus by 25% for a full 10 seconds whenever he picks up an elemental orb or particle. And lastly, Constellation 6, his ultimate constellation. Enemies who take damage from his burst will have their ammo resistance decreased by 20%, but also will have their resistance of the element absorbed by 20% as well. A huge damage improvement, but not without its cost. Venti's artifacts can be intimidating and a bit confusing at first because he has so many instances of damage. It's hard to know which will get the most benefit with his set selections. The ultimate decision comes down to this. Do you use a 4-piece set of Viridescent Venerer or a 2-piece set of Viridescent Venerer and a 2-piece set of Noblesse Oblige? The initial choice may seem like an obvious one, that being 4-piece Viridescent Venerer, and you'd be correct in thinking that it's the better set. But you can't blame those for thinking that the 2 and 2 set would be a good choice for simply improving Venti's damage alone, using him less like a team player. The fact is though, that an often overlooked aspect of the 4-piece Viridescent set is that it increases swirl damage by 60%, which is actually quite a big boost in damage considering the only other ways to increase swirl damage are by leveling up Venti or increasing his elemental mastery, and this 60% essentially equating to 150 elemental mastery. The elemental resonance shred on this set though also increases the damage dealt by Venti if his burst absorbs an element. Overall, across most builds and assuming a positive scenario, that being multiple enemies and elemental absorption, you're looking at roughly a 10% increase of damage over the set with Noblesse Oblige. Even at its worst, only affecting one enemy with an elemental absorption occurring not at the start of the burst, the sets are tied, meaning that there's far more benefit in going with the 4-piece set and should be considered the universal set. But what about his main stats? We already mentioned that we can improve Venti's swirl damage with the 4-piece Venerer set, so that leads us to thinking that maybe we want elemental mastery. But we also want his burst up as often as possible, so maybe energy recharge. But then again, Venti's burst deals 3 instances of damage in an ideal scenario: anemo damage, infused damage, and swirl damage. So maybe attack is the way to go to increase the damage of the former two. And that's exactly where we land. For Venti's timepiece, attack percent will provide a bigger boost in damage over elemental mastery, as the latter would only increase his swirl damage and not the former 2 instances, which are where a majority of his damage comes from. This is all assuming, of course, you can consistently acquire enough energy to use his burst on cooldown, in which case you may want to substitute in an energy recharge piece. Though you should be good enough. Given that Venti's Ascension stat is energy recharge, and with a couple decent substats and Venti's proclivity for energy generation, it shouldn't be needed. For his cup, anemo damage is the highest scaling damage source from his burst, but don't forget that we also want to increase the damage of his skill. And finally, for his circlet, a crit stat, depending on what you need after all your other substats and weapons are taken into consideration. Finally, we come to the most fun aspect of kit building in my opinion, and that is choosing Venti's weapon. Venti's best in slot is the Skyward Harp, followed closely behind by Amos's bow and situationally Stringless. Skyward Harp is just a nutty weapon, to be frank. Not only having the highest base attack in the game, but also having both crit rate and crit damage as sub and passive stats is quite frankly one of the best weapons in the game. Just by switching from the second best bow, Amos's bow, to this weapon, you're looking to acquire just under 10% DPS improvement. That being said, Amos's bow is still a solid option. While we won't use the passive in any way, shape, or form, Amos's bow still has a high base attack with an attack substat, and as we discussed with Venti's artifacts, we like those attack percentages. I said before that Stringless was situationally third, and that has a lot to do with the pitfalls of the weapon. That mainly being the Elemental Mastery substat, which, as we discussed earlier, should not be the main concern when building Venti. That being said, at refinements 4 and 5, simply because of the huge boost in damage from the passive, it can compete and even occasionally surpass Amos's bow. But it does perform best in situations where you are hitting multiple mobs at once, which frankly is where Venti shines. But in situations where you're fighting a single enemy, such as a weekly boss for example, Viridescent Hunt would slide up one slot in priority as the crit chance is simply more valuable. Rust doesn't provide anything from the passive, but does offer a solid attack percent substat. Sacrificial Bow should be reserved as an option at higher refinements, only offering damage improvement by allowing a second activation of our skill. With a higher chance to proc, the more overall damage will do over an extended fight. As a free-to-play alternative, Prototype Crescent will be your best option, offering the highest base attack you can receive in-game and an attack substat. In conclusion, while on the surface, Venti might seem like a simple vacuum, a plug-and-play character if you will, he's actually quite nuanced, with a lot of complicated twists and turns that can vary and change your damage outputs based on what you put into him. Whether using him as a full support or one of your primary damage dealers, this little whimsical bard is not one to be trifled with. Hopefully you guys have found this guide useful and it will help you in building your own Venti. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell, that way you never miss a video, and join our Discord, link will be down in the description below. But guys, that's all I have for today. Hopefully you did enjoy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.